And welcome to another edition of the Carolina Contractor Show. My name is Eric Smith. Across from me, Donnie Blanchard. Hey, you traveling for Thanksgiving?
Not really. Just looking forward to it.
We never travel until this year. We're going like 6.5 hours each way.
Oh, wow. Bless you.
Over 2.5 days.
Wow.
We're just going to do a drive-by, get something to eat, and come on back from West Virginia.
Road trip.
Exactly. Well, if you want to know more about the Carolina Contractor Show, it's not just about traveling to relatives and mother-in-law's houses during Thanksgiving. It's about your house, the inside, the outside, up, down, from the roof to the crawl space. Maybe we'll talk about my crawl space today. And if you have a question about your house, go to the website. Let's start with that address first, thecarolinacontractor.com. We've got links to the Facebook page, and that's a great place to get in touch with us. So again, if you have a question about your house, Donnie's wheelhouse is roofs because he's with SureTop Roofing, but you can ask any question. We've done things about the aforementioned crawl spaces, outdoor grilling, because Donnie's a genius at that, the walls, the inside, the outside, thecarolinacontractor.com. You can submit the questions there. You can also find the YouTube page, and we have all sorts of information. Plus, if you missed any past episodes, you can go to thecarolinacontractor.com and listen to them there through a podcast. And speaking of past shows, you got some hate mail or something, didn't you?
No, we, because of the Carolina football broadcast on several Saturdays in a row, we got bumped around. And so because it was going to air so early in the morning, we just didn't bother to record. You know, a lot goes into this. It's turned into a second job. So we just opted out until Carolina football slows down a little bit. So a lady asked me why we had so many reruns on another affiliate station, and we just explained to her that we'd be back in a timely manner. But I'm just kind of hoping that things don't get locked down again because there's no such thing as a stay-at-home contractor. Just hearing the whispers that things may get locked back down with the increased COVID cases, and there's nothing we can do about it. I just hope that that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think that's a big problem with a lot of businesses is they don't want to go through this again because, as we know, many, especially restaurants and small independent businesses, have just closed shop. They're gone forever.
That's it.
So we can't afford to do it for 2, 3, 4 months. And we've heard different states get different amounts of time. But another lockdown, I'm with you. I don't think it's beneficial long term.
Right. Something else I want to mention is we've gotten a lot of questions in, and we haven't been able to get to everybody's questions. They've really been flowing since people are staying at home more.
Right.
And just a piece of advice, I say this all the time, and I don't want to beat the dead horse, but starting a house right now is just about the worst timing you can have as far as getting something out of the ground. And we always preach that you need to get a foundation out of the ground, at least maybe dry it in through the framing before the end of the year. If not, it's just worth it to wait until spring. And I have a lot of folks that, because of interest rates, they're itching to get a house out of the ground right now. And I just think that if you can get through the permitting process, bank paperwork, and everything like that, then go for it right now. But I would advise to have all your subcontractors lined up and, wait until spring. Just seems like it makes more sense. Lumber prices are still up. And we did a video show on the logistics of material delivery and just what's driving the price increases recently. And I came across an interesting article that in 2018, we put a 20% tariff on Canadian lumber. So everything coming out of the north got a pretty big tax hike. And we didn't, on our end of it, we didn't produce more to account for that. So, one of the things that's attributed to this material shortage, of course, hurricanes, construction's booming, and then the tariff for the lumber out of the north. So hopefully we can get all that worked out and get things back to normal. That said, I don't see any slowdowns in my area. So thankful for that.
Yeah, supply and demand. Right.
That's it.
Good example of it. Also, if you need an HVAC unit in the near future, you think now's the time to get that?
I do. We're going to have an HVAC expert on in a week or so, and he's just full of good information. But one thing that I'm hearing about, not necessarily just from him, but some of my inspector friends, is that they're making changes in the HVAC world. So because of coronavirus, a couple of the things that they're advising for commercial buildings is that they lower the fan speed or adjust the fan speed down so that it's not circulating the air. For that to happen and the unit to still dehumidify, cool, or heat the air, it has to run longer cycles. So they're advising businesses to keep their HVAC on all night and just let it cycle the air out, and that will help out with air changes per hour. But if this comes into residential, it's not going to cost less. So if they have to change the regulations and the inner workings of the heating and air, I just think that this might be the last year before some of that stuff comes into play and you can get a good heating and air system. My mind immediately went to what they did to shower heads with the flow restrictors. So,
air restriction on the blowers in the system.
Exactly. And I don't think it will impact you as much as a slower shower, but at the same time, it's going to cost more. And I just feel like if you're almost there and you know that you've had your HVAC unit for 15 years, it may be time to get somebody out to look at it and just at least get a quote on a replacement.
Very good. All right, we mentioned earlier about listening to past shows. And again, you can do that at thecarolinacontractor.com. But the last show we did, we were talking about energy use, and if Biden won the presidency, some of the proposals he had and the Green New Deal, and well, by all accounts, Biden's going to be the president, and some of those things could come into a reality.
Right.
When you're talking about like the HVAC. What were some of the things you thought about we highlighted in that show?
Yeah, just to recap a few things, it was great for a conversation starter. We got so many emails that it generated a lot more email back and forth than anything else ever has. And so thought it was worthy to at least mention that show. But to recap it, I think we're barking up the wrong tree. 60% of energy usage is industrial. So with all these changes to residential, you can implement these successfully, and it's still not going to solve the problem as a whole. But just on a personal note, I think that things are products, the way we live, everything is intended to make our life easier. And
Exactly.
so the way that people have been conditioned to live easier, net zero is work. Even though you build the house efficiently and it's incredibly insulated, you still have to monitor your energy consumption.
Exactly.
If you have more than just yourself in the house, you have to account for your partner. You have to account for children or whoever's in and out of that house. And a wise man said there's no such thing as net zero houses, just net zero people. Right. So a lot of the builders that we work with as on the roofing side of things, you hear this from a lot of the old school guys. They're just not willing to change right now, and they want to build the house as cheap as possible, and their heart is right in some cases because they pass that discount on to the homeowner. Hence, lower price per square foot. Supposedly everybody's happy in that instance, but in all fairness, a lot has happened in the last 30 years. So I look back to 1990, things like windows and insulation have just come so far that if we were going to give this idea a chance, I think it would be dependent on how advanced battery technology is and how far solar has come in that. And just if this can be pulled off in any way, shape, or form, I really feel like renewable energy is going to be the key.
And I think on top of that, one of the ideas for this whole Green New Deal was retrofitting houses. And as we discussed on that same show, retrofitting isn't a bad idea.
Right.
But it's not as economical maybe as just starting from the ground up. Almost saying, okay, from here on out, from the year 2022, every house that's built has to be built to these specifications because you'll get more bang for your buck, more energy savings than you will trying to spend literally hundreds of billions, if not over $1 trillion, trying to retrofit an old house. Again, you can listen to that episode. Go to thecarolinacontractor.com. And I can't believe I'm not talking about the big elephant in the room. You can start watching these shows because you got to show everybody without doing too much, Donnie, that's not a green screen of a great backdrop behind you. That's the real deal.
It's the real deal.
It's beautiful outside today. So that's one of the advantages of being in the studio and filming these shows. And you'll put those up on the YouTube site as you get them edited.
Yep, it'll be on YouTube. Of course, we're podcasted on Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and now we're on Amazon, so you can say, hey, Alexa, play the Carolina Contractor Show, and I think it works. We don't have Alexa, but I've been told it's okay.
Cool. All right, today's subject we're going to talk about, when you look out the window behind Donnie, you see the colored leaves, and it's very cold today, very cool fall weather as we move towards Thanksgiving, is winterizing your house. And just a few minutes ago, we were talking about HVAC systems of the future. That's one of the things you have to do every winter before you get started on anything else to worry about is the efficiency of your HVAC system.
Exactly. We preach this, and I know that we've covered this several times, but one thing that's so important, and I made this list myself, this isn't anything I got off of Google or just read up on. I just sat around for a few evenings and I said, okay, what do I need to do first of all, and what would I advise everyone else to do secondly? But having your HVAC serviced at least twice a year is super important. Some companies charge around $100 just to come out and do that. Depending on the area you're in, or maybe you have 2 units, that cost could go up a little bit. But the reason this is so important is because we talk about HVAC and roofing are the 2 big ticket items for your house. They both wear out. Where insulation is there forever, these are things that you will eventually have to replace. And we just advise that having a tech out They can, check all your refrigerant levels. They can check your fans. They can make sure that all the electrical is working properly. And I can't
They can
emphasize.
head off problems before
That's
they become
exactly
a problem.
right. They can save you thousands of dollars if you live in a house for 30 years and you only have to replace the heating and air one time, and say that's 15, 20 grand for that. If you have multiple units, it could be double that. But I just feel like having someone out to service that equipment, make sure everything's up to snuff. More than anything, I mean, we talk about happy wife, happy life. See how that goes when it's 45 degrees in your house, and you either have to go get a hotel, or heating and air guys are always busy at the same time. So when it's
Exactly.
really cold, it's hard to get them. When it's really hot, it's hard to get them. And just more than that, even it's just it contributes to your comfort. So
And I'm going to give you an example, true story at our house, of something that when you have your HVAC guy come out just to do a checkup, he
Right.
can find that you never thought of. Our dog was chewing on the 220 line.
ouch.
So the 220 line going in the AC, it's insulated, and then it's covered with a plastic sheath.
Right.
My dog had started chewing on it and gotten through, not the insulation, just the plastic sheath. And he goes, yeah, this could be bad for two reasons. Because when he makes it through, he can
Right.
short out your system, and your dog ain't going to be found. You're just going to find a puff of fur somewhere.
Wow.
So he taped it up, and then he put on a stronger piece of plastic that the dog could do. But again, he came out for a service check and found a problem that
Yeah.
we would have never noticed
Right.
until it was probably too late. Another thing you can do for winter, and if you're not cool with going on your roof yourself, hire someone. But cleaning the leaves from your gutters and getting them away from your house, it's also a chance to look in your gutters for maybe a dark granular material that's building up in
good
there,
point.
because that signifies what, Donnie?
You may need a new roof, or
Yeah.
at least roof inspection.
Yes, because when your roof starts to degrade, those little granular pieces of the shingle start moving down with the water, and they'll sit in your gutter, and they don't usually wash out because they're heavy enough. Another thing, and no one ever does this, how important is it closing the foundation vents around your house?
Super important, and it's debatable. So if you read up on this, it's split about 50-50, but there are a lot of people, and I probably lean towards this, is a lot of people say you should close your foundation vents year-round. Having moisture under your house is not a good thing. So in the summer, the hot, humid air gets under there, and when you consider things like the stack effect, when we mention the stack effect, we're usually talking about an attic space, so that the air enters in through the soffit. Stack effect causes it to rise towards the ridge vent, and that's how heat escapes through passive ventilation. But the same thing happens if air from the outside can get under your house. That air eventually will make its way up through your house. So if you don't have a vapor barrier, most people do now, but if you don't have that vapor barrier, you said you installed that at your house.
Yeah, we're going to go into that in
Yeah,
just a second.
yeah.
Finish your thought.
But the vapor barrier, if you don't have the vapor barrier and you do have moisture under your house, it's going to make its way up. And this used to not be a big deal because things were under insulated. And now that things are insulated so much better, once that moisture or bad air can get into your house, it really contributes to your indoor air quality, because your heating and air unit's going to cycle that. And of course, it has to work harder to dehumidify that air. And it's just a big can of worms that you don't want to open.
So maybe, in your opinion then, if you have any moisture in your crawl space, just go ahead and keep those vents closed 24/7,
Yeah,
365?
we have something I'm going to cover in terms of the cheap remodel things
Okay.
coming up that I'm going to address that on. But conditioned crawl space all the way. They're about 10 grand to do it, but if it extends the life of your air handler and it just contributes to your insulation, your comfort, your air quality, I just think it's a no-brainer.
All right, what I want to talk about is we had the remnants of that hurricane that went through last week. I live in Wilson, and the Wilson Rocky Mount area got between 6 and 9 inches of rain. So I walk outside that Thursday afternoon and notice to get into my crawl space, it's about a half-foot drop down where the door is.
Right.
And that little 1 foot by 2 foot opening is full of water.
Oh,
Now, my initial thought was it must have poured over the gutter. It couldn't hold it, so I took a 1 gallon bucket, did like 5 or 6 tosses. Nope, doesn't make a difference. So luckily I had a sump pump.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
threw that in and started doing that. And I didn't open the door because first I was kind of scared to open the door. You didn't want to see it, but I didn't know what would come out. So I just let it do that. After a couple hours, it dropped down. I open it and I see moisture, pools of water in my crawl space. Well, I knew it didn't come in through the vents.
right.
I knew it didn't come in from sheeting on the wall or the side. So I realized it's the water table. We already had saturated ground throw a half a foot of rain on top of that, it
Yeah.
rises up. But as you mentioned, I had vapor barrier put in earlier this summer. Well, that's got to come out
Yep.
because it's not going to fully dry.
That's right.
And then it's the discussion, which I've got to find out what we're going to do. The options are that's kind of a very rare thing that happened. It probably won't happen again. Put more vapor barrier down, start over,
Right.
or dig down and put in a sump pump and have it set on an automated with a manual override. So if I ever in a storm walked out and saw the first sign of it, it would fire up, or I could even manually turn it on and let it drain it out.
Gotcha.
But it does show you can have a dry crawl space for me, 20 years at the house.
Right.
Nothing. And then one storm. We've gone through hurricanes and everything. One storm, and I got 4 or 5 inches of water in there.
That happens a lot in new construction. I see a lot of times when people build in the wrong time of the year, like we just mentioned, basically they'll get the foundation in and they'll just get washed out with rain for a month or so, and the crawl space gets completely saturated, and then they frame the floor system right on top of that. So it never sees the light of day. And say it's 3 months later, you're moving into late spring and trying to close the house out. I've went under houses before, and it's still wet after that length of time because you haven't had any heat, haven't had much airflow, and no sunlight. So
And let's stress, there are plenty of foundation companies. I know if you have a termite company, they'll crawl under your house. Have someone go under your house just for the peace of mind, because they might say, "No, your house is fine." Now, one of the good things about it is none of my plumbing, no vent systems, nothing. The water didn't rise up enough to touch anything.
Good.
But that does lead to under the house, you can see all the plumbing and things like that. And for winterizing your house, that's one of the things you need to take care of, which is insulating. Is that something the average person can do, or would you recommend calling in someone?
insulation companies, they can buy the insulation so much cheaper than the average guy, and usually the labor is about the same thing as what you could buy it for.
Okay.
So, you know, you may pay a couple $100 extra, but to get under a house and to make sure it's done right and to have everything in the proper place to be code compliant, I would totally hire an insulation contractor, because it's not easy work. It's not pretty at all.
Now, does that include the drain pipes, the PVC? Would you have to wrap those?
Oh, no.
Only pressurized?
Yeah, basically pressurized, and
Okay.
copper is susceptible. A couple times that I've had issues through the coldest part of winter is when a copper pipe would run along the bottom side of a floor system, and where it turns up to go to the fixture, you know, a toilet's usually mounted against a wall. So where those copper lines go up through there, oftentimes there will be a foundation vent, because the brick mason and the plumber don't talk during the construction process to plan this
do not
out.
like each other.
And so, you know, I've seen copper pipes freeze when they're close to those foundation vents. And when we get to my recommendation for the foundation vents, of course, that would solve everything. But yeah, going under your crawl space, and if you have crawl space work done, if you know an electrician or you have any other electrical work done, one thing that we started to do is we advise people to string up lights or to tie lights in. Usually when you go into your crawl space, you flip
taking a
one switch,
flashlight.
or you flip one switch and you got a bulb right there at the door. And it's really minimal effort to wire up more lights through there. And an LED bulb, if you're going to see your crawl space twice a year, you know, it'll never wear out. So
Do Christmas lights. So when you have someone to go do repair in the middle of June, they hit the light switch, and as a matter of fact, hook up music to it. 'Cause
Hey,
that'll drive them crazy.
I had a thought when you were talking about cleaning out the gutters, and you mentioned if there's asphalt granules. A lot of people are confused about what those are. The asphalt granules are basically just the color, and the manufacturer describes them as a sunscreen. The real roofing is the fiberglass mat underneath, and that's what keeps the water out. So I tell folks, if you're looking at your roof from the ground and it has almost like a sparkle to it or a twinkle, what you're seeing is that fiberglass, and the sun is making it shine. So yeah, it's
So you're definitely past due if you see that.
if you see the fiberglass, it's time to give me a call.
Call Sure Top Roofing or visit their website, suretoproofing.com. And again, Donnie and his staff, their estimates are free, and you get to see a drone in some cases, which is kind of cool. And this is the Carolina Contractor Show. We're talking about things you can do to winterize your house. And one more thing I want to talk about is weather stripping. So we got French doors put in the back of our house, and it has the weather stripping line outside that was built into the door. We have 3 cats because I have a wife and 2 daughters, so they each get one. They shredded from about 18 inches down,
Right.
and it's not easy to replace on that one.
Right.
But the second we got this cold snap the other day, you feel that air coming through, and it's me off to Lowe's going, okay, I need to get the special piece. But weather stripping is a cheap, easy DIY
Yep.
system you can do. Give examples why it's so important.
Well, we always talk about convective and conductive heat transfer. So
Warning, science.
The heat transfer that takes place is usually around windows, and windows are vulnerable because they're only in R3. But a lot of times, if you can feel a draft in your house, it's because the windows weren't properly insulated. You've got the casing around the window, so it's not easy to get to the perimeter. But a lot of times, you can solve that by just caulking the casing and keeping the air from being able to push through. There's constant pressure on your house, and a lot of people just live with the draft. But
Right.
When your return kicks on, it's pulling air from the place of least resistance, which is usually under that door or around that window. So it's constantly pulling air from the outside in, making your unit work harder. Your house isn't as comfortable. A lot of times in older houses, they'll have a room that they call the cold room,
Yeah.
and they never hang out in the cold room. And
Mother-in-law room. Yeah.
Right, it's because the room is just terribly insulated. The heating and air guru we're going to have on in a couple of weeks. We're doing a lot of work. He's going total Carolina contractor on his house. Everything. I mean, new windows, conditioned crawl space. We're doing just a full-blown remodel, and then insulating everywhere we possibly can. But we, instead of replacing his windows with replacement windows, we did something that's available called a sash replacement kit.
Okay.
And a sash replacement kit, the advantage to that is you basically use the window frame that's there, and the windows are top-notch windows. They're pretty expensive, but about the same as a replacement window. And the
Okay.
thing to take into consideration is when you do a replacement window, you have to account for the frame,
Right.
as well as the frame of the sash. So you actually close your square inch of glass space down, where the sash replacement kit, that's not the case at all. So you maintain as much glass as you had before, sometimes more depending on the window style. But the cool thing is they're insulated right out of the pack. So when you put the runners in for the sashes to attach to, the runners basically have compression insulation there, and the purpose for that is when you put the tracks in and you actually install the sashes in the tracks, that compressed insulation is constantly pushing against the side of the window, so it keeps it in there tight. And man, I'll tell you, it made a huge difference. Josh is his name, and he called me the next morning and he said our house was a lot colder than this last year, but from day one, it made a big difference on the indoor air temperature.
Great information.
Yep.
Now, those are some winterizing things, and man, we got so much stuff trying to pack in the show. We got like
Yeah.
half a dozen minutes, but
Right.
we also want to talk about, aside from winterizing, we want to talk about a couple moves you could make in the winter of remodels. What are
Yep.
some of the ones you recommend doing?
The list I made, and this is something we hammer home all the time, but blown-in insulation in your attic. Stick your head in your attic. If you don't have very much insulation, or say the insulation's only as tall as the ceiling joist, it should be about 15 inches of insulation. And building code currently is an R38, so that's right at 13, 15 inches. And if you call an insulation contractor out, it doesn't cost very much more to bump that up to an R44. Like I said, insulation's permanent. It doesn't have any working parts, and so
Right.
it just pays to over-insulate if you can do that. That said, a pull-down stair is usually a vulnerable point. So in an older house,
we sometimes call that an attic.
yeah, right.
Pull-down
the
stair,
attic pull
what
down.
are
Sorry, yeah, hot water heater. There you
Yeah,
go.
exactly. It's a water heater. Let's not digress on that stuff.
Nice.
So you got your attic and
Yeah.
with your pull down.
Right. Well, so in a lot of times with an old home, they would have a hallway, which was the only place you could really fit a pull-down stair and have
Right.
a clear space for the stair to drop. Well, if you look down from that, there's usually the thermostat, and underneath that is the return. So when that return kicks on, it's pulling air from the point of least resistance, which is usually right out of that attic. And if you don't understand building science, that's just something that you learn to live with, but it's definitely an easy thing. Like you mentioned, weather stripping is totally DIY, cheap. Retrofitting a pull-down stair, which is usually about a 3/8 or a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. I mean, there's no insulation value hardly at all. Basically, with weather stripping, rigid foam insulation, a tube of caulk, you can do wonders. And if you go that far with it, you can also buy something online called an attic tent, and they're
Yes.
$100, $200. But an attic tent will sit right over that pull-down stair, and it will basically be the insulation for that vulnerable point where you have a protrusion from the heated space to the attic
And as
space.
I've mentioned before, my wife and I, 15 years ago, made our own version of an attic tent before we even
Right.
knew there's such a thing. Because a lot of people walk to your house, go to your attic,
Yeah.
and see how close your return vent is. Ours was approximately 3 feet from the attic. So again, the point Donnie's making is the air seeping out of your attic. That return vent says, "Oh, thank you
Right.
for this in the winter, cold air, or in the summer, this hot air," and your
Right.
system has to work harder. We talked about windows when we're talking about insulation, the importance of windows. Now, crawl space, we talked about that too. Both of those have kind of the same thing. being sealed. Anything
Yep.
else about those two items?
You could have a water alarm installed in your crawl space. If you have copper pipes, that might be a cheap thing to do, just for insurance purposes. And if you're never in your crawl space, especially if the temperature outside isn't ideal. So
Right.
if you have a leak, pipe burst is going to tell on itself pretty quick. But just a leak in your crawl space is one of those things that could go on for a long time, and you never know it unless you're on city water and you see an increase in your bill or something.
And
But
by then, that's a
Right.
month out.
yeah, and another note on the pull down stairs before we jump off of that.
Sure.
A lot of
I see what you did.
a lot of people just swap the whole thing out. A carpet, they're about $500 for the good ones, but the one we have in my personal home is made by Marwin, Marwin, and it's called a Thermoblock. And I did this 10 years ago, but the ones that are available now have almost double the R value of what was available 10 years ago. And Thermoblock is with just a C on the end, it's no CK. But if you want to look that up online and find out what local hardware store may have those available, I'd say $200 for a carpenter, and then maybe $500 for the door, and you don't have to worry with any of that retrofit business.
Yes, we upgraded to one and had somebody else install a new attic and pull downstairs,
Yep.
as you like to call it. And it made a big difference right off the bat. But that was something I could have probably done.
Yeah.
Didn't want to get involved.
Right.
It was much easier to let someone knock it out in a day. And
Yeah.
I went to work
They
instead.
they have 5-inch treads as well. So if you walk up a pull down stair, it's usually an uncomfortable walk up there because the treads are so thin.
Right.
These I want to say about a 5.5-inch tread is what it has. So
that's
taking
like
the
real
Christmas
stairs.
decor, yeah, right.
No, I have a son bring the Christmas decor down. All right, we got a few minutes left, so we want to burn through some questions because we haven't done some in a while. If you have a question for Donnie, go to the website, thecarolinacontractor.com. There's a little button there called Ask the Contractor. Go ahead and fill out your question and a contact number or some contact information. Donnie will try to answer your question. We like to take some of them and answer them on the air. So we're going to start off with this one that was sent to Donnie. We recently replaced our roof and the roofer cut in ridge vents on both buildings. Now we have debris in the attic spaces of the houses and garage. Was cutting the ridge vent the wrong thing to do?
Well, the roofer didn't ask the homeowner, so he just did it, and he thought he was doing the right thing. And believe it or not, roofing doesn't sound glamorous, but there is a little bit of science to it. And the manufacturers all say that if you must have a ridge vent, and they say that the attic has to be ventilated, and they should probably put the next sentence as if it doesn't have gable vents. So this particular house had gable vents, which are in the triangular areas of your elevations. When you pull up to the house, you usually see a vent right at the top of that triangle. And before ridge vents were readily available or as good as they are now, this was the only way people could vent their attic out. And so what happens is the manufacturers say that you have to, it's either or, it's not both and. You can't have a ridge vent and the gable vents. Right. So what it does is kind of create a vacuum. So a ridge vent is supposed to pull air in through the soffit and let it exhaust out of the ridge vent. When you have the gable vents up high like that, the gable vents square inch wise are so much larger than the ridge vents. What happens is the air goes out the gables instead of the ridges, and it sucks air in from the place of least resistance, and that happens to be the ridge vent right there. So pollen season, it'll cover everything in your attic in pollen. It does the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. So he didn't do the wrong thing, but what you do in that case is go in the attic if you have access to it and put a piece of plywood on the back side of those gable vents, and problem solved.
All right. Or just call SureTop Roofing
There you
or
go.
visit SureTopRoofing.com instead. Second question. We had a metal roof installed a few years ago and the screws are backing out. Any idea what might be going on?
Yeah, we see this once a blue moon, and if it were December, my kids would say the elf on the shelf did it, but
Because they're
we're,
evil.
we're
The-
not
the
there
elf
yet.
on the shelf, not
Yeah,
your kids.
They're a lot of work too, man. But what happens is when the seasons change, plywood shrinks and swells. So what that metal is usually screwed into, being the roof sheathing, it's going to move a little bit. And so as the seasons change, it gets hot to cold or cold to hot. Those screws, it just works them out little by little. So after 3 or 4 years, you've got an inch gap underneath the screw. And this is only for exposed fastener. It doesn't apply to the concealed fastener and standing seam systems because all the screws are underneath the metal. But on an exposed fastener system, this can happen. And just depending on the attic space, a lot of times not being ventilated properly. I saw one instance, and I could never prove if this was really the case, but had someone with a lot of moisture in their attic, and this is because their attic was poorly ventilated. They actually had 2 bath fans that were going into the attic and just blowing the moist air from the bathroom constantly. And so what happened was during the cold months, basically the screws would get the moisture on the bottom of the screw threads, and it would freeze. And when it would freeze and thaw through that cycle, it was causing those screws just to turn ever so slightly, and after they turn just very minor amount over and over and over, caused the screw to back out. And the way we figured that out is it was only in the areas where the moisture is being introduced into the attic. So it was happening right over both bathrooms.
Well, there you go. Or it could be a poltergeist. Hey, we've got time. One more question here. What is the difference in a standing seam and a screw down metal?
Yeah, I grouped these together. Standing seam is what you see. It's more expensive version, probably about 3 times more on the cost, but standing seam far superior. Usually the Valspar or the Kynar paint finishes are what go on the standing seam.
Right.
It's much more thicker. It's 24 gauge, where the exposed fastener is only 29. Exposed fastener is sometimes labeled as ag panel because it's common to see on barns or just agricultural uses. But people have started putting it on houses because it's so darn cheap. I'm not a big fan. The paint warranty for the exposed fastener is, I want to say 10 or 15 years, but it's a siliconized polyester paint, where the other with the Valspar or the Kynar finish is about a 40-year warranty. And basically, if you maintain it, it's a forever roof. And like I mentioned in the last question, with a standing seam, it's a concealed fastener system, so all the screws are underneath the metal, and there's really nowhere it can possibly leak. It is, I would say, the very top of the line roof. But that said, shingles spent a lot of years chasing metal in terms of warranty.
Right.
And used to have a 30-year shingle, but now the shingle manufacturers have figured out how to make the shingles so good that we have 50-year warranties in place. So shingles are a third or sometimes a fourth of the cost, depending on if the house is cut up, and they have 10 years more of warranty. So in terms of bang for the buck, shingles are the way to go.
And for more bang for the buck, go to the website, thecarolinacontractor.com. We didn't get to all the questions. We will next week. We'll be back at our normal time. And also, if you have a question for Donnie about something that isn't related to your shingles, thecarolinacontractor.com. And if you need help with your roof, definitely contact SureTopRoofing.com. Donnie's staff will come out there. Estimates are free. Is this a good time of year to come out looking at it before we get into the really cold weather?
That's right, it is. And if nothing else, just to make sure you're good through the winter, and maybe for budgetary purposes, planning on a spring install, it's a good time to go ahead and get your ducks in a row.
Yes. And if you want to look at the YouTube video, if it's up yet, look at that background view we have. It's all high tech here. We appreciate you tuning in. Again, if you have any questions or you just want to learn more about the show, the website is the place to start, thecarolinacontractor.com. And I can't remember how we finished this show.
The best thing Donnie can tell you is...
I gotcha. We'll leave this in for the video, but we'll edit it for the show.
Okay.
And if you have a question about your roof, visit SureTopRoofing.com. They'll come out, look at it, give you an estimate. Maybe you don't need any work. Maybe you do. Maybe you need a new roof or just a fix. But the best thing Donnie can say is what?
Your roof looks great. Call me next year.
All right, fist pump to the camera. Boom. I had my old man moment.